Welcome to the Armory. I'm Archaic, your host, and you are watching week 3 with my student Glitched. How are you doing this week, Glitched?
Not too bad. Not too bad. A little tired,
Good,
but I'm all right.
good. So, with the start of every status report, I first ask you how you are feeling about your play this week. So, what do you think you did well, and what do you think you're going to work on for next week?
Um, if anything, what I've been doing well is being consistent with my builds.
Hmm.
And the only one I haven't been really is with Zerg because I haven't exactly figured out what to do against them yet. I'm still kind of winging it. Then again, I guess the bonus about winging it against them is I'm able to just learn how to adapt to whatever's coming at me, which I've been getting
Right.
better at too, because I have been winning games against them. So there is that. Um, for next week though, to be honest, I want gold so bad. Or the itch has started to come back a little bit, so I'm looking forward to
Good.
that.
We're on the cusp, I think. It's like you can only play so many games before Blizzard will promote you.
Yep.
And I'm starting to be like, okay, guys, seriously, it's been like 3 weeks.
Yep. I'm rank one, man. It's gotta happen.
It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. And saying like John is like, you should be winning all of these games. Why aren't you winning every game? You silly, silly man. Stop losing, John.
He'll
If
get
you're
there.
Zavel, when you watch this, you stop losing. You're
Yep.
better than all of these players.
Sable, add me in the Starcraft. Seriously. Like
Oh, yeah.
practice and stuff.
Oh, yeah. So something we saw this week glitched is your consistency, like you said. Did you say what you're going to work on this week?
I want to get that Zerg build figured out and find
Good.
something that's a little bit more effective in the early game to use against them.
Yeah.
Um, I'm playing really, really defensively early game. I want to be able to become a little bit more aggressive against them and work on that.
Especially against Zerg. Yes.
I'm thinking probably like a Reaper Hellion opening of some sort, maybe, or something. I
That's
don't
a
know.
lot of aggression. Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like we've established a baseline of where you are mechanically this week. I can say with quite a bit of confidence that, if you choose to maintain this baseline of your mechanics, if you never improve it,
Mm.
you can be Grandmaster with these numbers. There are Grandmasters with your numbers or worse than your numbers. So the question becomes, what's good enough? For me, it's always about the pursuit of perfection, and I am a very mechanically focused, or I really, really focus on that side of the game. So it's all about perfection. I'm not happy until my supply block is sitting like at the 20 seconds, which is something you can't even get better. And it's
Mm.
pretty much getting those numbers to 0.
Yeah.
But the reality is you're not me, and we all play differently. So for some players, moving away from directly focusing on the mechanics is what they do, and some people just always have that as sort of a fundamental thing they're watching.
Yeah.
So I will always push you to perfection, and that's the goal with me coaching you, is to push these mechanics to perfection. But the reality is our focus is going to turn from mechanics into other things in the game. But don't ever neglect your mechanics. There's something that should
Mm.
always be improving, even if it's one small step at a time. As much as 10 seconds off your supply block is significant, and it
Yeah.
will help you in the long run. So do realize. So if I don't talk about it as much in these next coaching sessions, just remember that is where we want to be.
Totally.
There's still this kind of roadblock I'm seeing in your game, and it's obviously your time supply blocked. Why do you think being supply blocked is such a big deal?
That's very simple. If your supply blocked, you can't build anything at all, right?
Right.
As far as army goes, right? So
It's yeah, it's like this thing that just stops you in your tracks. It's like, woo, like, and in this last week, if like everyone can see those numbers on screen, but you're still spending about 10% of your game unable to build SCVs, unable to produce units, which are basically like the two most essential things in the game.
yeah,
So 10% of the game you're forced to play incorrectly just by a simple mistake. And I want to emphasize that because simple mistakes are forcing yourself to play incorrectly. And that's a big thing we want to get rid of because we want to play correctly and we want to learn the game correctly. Because if we learn how to play the game with supply blocks, then you're learning a game that is not optimal, and that'll be bad in the future.
yeah.
As far you have this like incredible strong point, you've really chosen to focus on timings. In TVT, these are the builds you've been using this last week. We see you opening Banshees and then following it up with this really sick tank push. It's things that let you delve deeply at a specific time in the game that gives you a really strong understanding of the game at those points in time. So you know specifically how many units your opponents is able to have at those points in the game when you're doing this tank push. Because not only were you harassing with Banshees, not only do you have that information, but the more damage you do with the Banshees, the stronger your push is, right? So it's just really, really good follow-up, this build, this timing that is really helping you just like absolutely crush your opponents. And it shows. Your TVTs looked sick good compared to your opponents. So it's so cool that you're focusing on something like this in the game because I think Terrans rely so much on this sort of idea that we can manipulate the pace of the game just by doing things like Banshee harass and then doing these nice timings that is worked in with that. So that's something I really, really want to encourage you to do for all matchups. So when you're thinking about this Terran vs. Zerg for this next week, that is a really good thing you can think of. You can think of, okay, I want to do some harassment early into this really nice timing push because the harassment will sort of snowball into this big punch where you can really do damage, like do things like take out a third. And that's all because you had successful harassment in the early game.
Yeah. I'm just really not sure what to harass them with. Like, I've tried Hellion harassment against them before, but the Queens and whatever Zerglings I have usually just mop it up, right?
I like this question. This is a really good question. Terran vs. Zerg, the most damage a Terran can ever do is forcing the Zerg not to make drones. Okay. So just by having the ability to harass your opponent, the Zerg, can a lot of the time do more damage than actually committing to the harassment. Okay. One of the things we saw MVP do so successfully in Terran vs. Zerg was do Hellion harass while taking that fast expand and never losing a Hellion. If you maintain those Hellion numbers and just continually add to that Hellion ball, it becomes more threatening, which requires your opponent to have more defense. And the entire time, it's causing your opponent to have an answer for those Hellions. So I'm not saying Hellions are the answer, but Hellions are something that have been used so successfully in Terran vs. Zerg and for such a long time that that's where I'd push you towards to start testing out. But Reapers are less of a committal. So Reapers, although don't threaten as much and are a lot more fragile because they're not as fast as Hellions, they do for similar things. Because if you force a Zerg to get, or maybe not force, but get speed and get 10 lings and still maintain those Reaper numbers, then that is a successful thing. That's 5 drones.
Gotcha.
The equivalent of killing, right? So you don't necessarily have to jump those Reapers in and kill 5 drones. You can simply jump the Reapers around until you see 10 lings and then go home, right? It's a very opposite way of looking at it, but for Terran versus Zerg and any kind of matchup against Zerg, that is such an important way to think about it, because Zerg's economy is so much tied to their production capability. So Banshee Harass is another great thing. The problem with Banshee Harass is they force units like Queens, which don't take up larva.
Yeah.
So I'm not such a big fan of Banshee Harass, and it's a lot more of a commitment, but it is quite an effective tool. So also, it is kind of that balancing act.
Yeah. And the Zerg Spore Crawlers are very, very, very cheap. Considerably.
And way better than they were. Way better than they were. So that's a great thing maybe to start fiddling with. There's tons of different ways to do it. Like the one thing you have to watch out with Hellion Harass is its vulnerability to things like roaches, which is what a lot of Zergs have done to me in the past. Is I open Hellion and they'll switch into the roach. So you have to have sort of this nice defensive capability with that Hellion Harass. But it is something I would say is like the staple in Terran vs. Zerg is Hellions. So,
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's tons of pro games, any pro games Terran vs. Zerg watch, and it'll give you a good idea, because it is really up to the Terran to force the Zerg to do things, not necessarily. If the Zerg just sits there and does what he wants, then he's the happy one. Very rarely is the Terran happy to be left alone for 5-10 minutes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You see a Zerg that's alone for 5 to 10 minutes, and all of a sudden he's like, "Hi, here's a crap ton of Zerglings."
I took the hive. I have ultras.
Yeah.
Buddy!
Exactly.
Yeah. And obviously, old school Terran thought was the 2 racks. I don't know if you've played with 2 racks. The 12-14 variant, not the 11-11. It's really dated, but it is an effective tool to forcing the Zerg really early on to have to deal with it. But it's dated. Not very many Terrans do it anymore, so it's just another option that you can test out. But anyways, definitely let us know next week what you kind of figure out.
Yeah.
That'll be really cool for everyone out there. Sort of give us an idea of your Terran vs. Zerg. That has been the status report for week 3 with Glitched. So we'll be back for part 2 with a replay analysis of one of his games from this week. I'm Archaic for Archaic Coaching on YouTube and Twitter. And this is Glitched.
Thanks, guys.
We'll be back for the replay analysis.